Indian tennis is in a deep, dark hole of trouble, and at this point, there seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel. At a time when other sports in India are making progress, tennis has deteriorated to all-time lows. Now, this has been on the horizon for some time, but the tipping point happened recently when India were embarrassed 4-0 by a very average team from Sweden in the Davis Cup. At this point, Rohan Bopanna tweeted, "It's about time," he said. "Time for a cultural shift." He talks about 1, a stronger domestic circuit, 2, improved grassroots infrastructure, 3, focus on youth development, 4, player-coach synergy, and 5, more international exposure. Now, of course, he's right. But what is sad about this tweet is that all that he is suggesting should have happened 20 years ago. If you look at tennis in India, we do have a legacy in the sport. Going back to Ramanathan Krishnan, who reached the semi-finals of Wimbledon twice. Then you had the Amritraj brothers, Vijay and Anand, especially Vijay, who had a successful career. We've reached the Davis Cup finals on 3 occasions, 1966, 74 and 87. And then, of course, we had the big 3, Leander Paes, Mahesh Bhupati and Sania Mirza, who reached the top of the sport. Their achievements are well known. And finally, now we have Rohan Bopanna, who had reached number 1 in the world as well. Out of all the players I mentioned, only Rohan Bopanna is still active. But he's 44 years old. There's no one, and I mean no one on the horizon who is even close to being a significant player in the sport. Now, Sumit Nagal has cracked the top 100 in singles, and credit to him for reaching there on grit and hard work. But, and I say this with all due respect to him, at this point, it doesn't look like he's going to leave his mark on the game the way some of the people I mentioned did. So the sport is at its lowest point in India. I think everyone will agree to that. But that's not how other sports have trended in India. Badminton, for example, has moved from a single person in Prakash Padukone back in the 80s to 20 years later we had Gopi Chand, and eventually a movement was kick-started by Saina Nehwal, PV Sindhu, Srikanth, Kidambi. And now the future in the sport is bright with Lakshya Sen, Chirag and Satvik, and even a 13-year-old Tanvi Patri has been identified as potentially being the next star. This year, we sent 21 shooters to the Olympic Games. We have more athletes in track and field at the highest level. And hockey seems to be back on track. And overall, we are moving in the right direction. I know it's a bit slow in some sports, but it's still in the right direction. Now, I get it. I'm smart enough to know that one sport cannot be compared to another. Tennis is an expensive game. Its requirements vary from other sports. I get that. And it's also not a contest. But the point I'm making here is that sports are making progress and tennis is regressing. And that's where the issue is, the regression. There is a reason countries repeatedly produce athletes that are good in certain sports. It becomes part of that country's sporting culture. Just like India produces cricketers and hockey players, we have started to produce wrestlers and badminton players, and now we produce shooters as well. Tennis is the one sport where we are moving backwards despite having athletes who have reached the pinnacle of the sport. And if what Rohan Bopanna has said is not done, and you know what, not just what he has said, but a lot more is not done, then tennis players from India will become an endangered species if they aren't already. The only question is, and I don't know the answer to this, but who's going to do it? Who was Rohan Bopanna tweeting to? Because right now, no one is taking ownership. Everyone is pointing fingers, and there does not seem to be a plan in place. If there is, I'm happy and would love to hear it. It just feels like the sport is running on life support at the moment, and if nothing is done, it will die. What are your thoughts? Thanks for watching Sportify.